I haven't had one single student from any country in the world that doesn't know this sentence, would you like an invoice?
Yeah,
Which
of
means
course.
in every part of the world, do you want to be taxed or not? In every part of the world, all you need to say is, do you want an invoice?
Yeah.
And literally everyone understands that that is a code to, do you want to be charged tax or do you not want to be charged tax? Over 90%, so over 9 in 10 people realized that tax fraud was being committed. So they identified correctly that it was fraud, and they identified it correctly as it was wrong. So tax fraud is now unacceptable. Now, when you ask people, do you think it's being committed? Then the numbers increase massively. So people say it's wrong, but everyone does it. Now, forget the word tax. This is just any illegal activity. Someone is being punished for a crime they did not commit, that was committed by someone else. Sometimes, at the time that they contacted that person, the crime had not even been committed. So the crime may be committed in the future. And it doesn't even need to be in the same country. It can have been committed in another country. If you eliminate the word tax from what I just said,
I know.
no one would accept this. But you insert the word tax and suddenly it is acceptable.
Hello, my name is Paweł Mikuła. I'm a tax advisor and head of value-added tax practice at Halcyon Tax Customs Legal. I'm almost 20 years in VAT. And all this time I searched for something to listen to that would keep me informed about everything crucial in VAT law, policy and trends, for one reliable source to listen to. But what I often found was too much information and unnecessary complexity. That's why we have created the Vadvocate Podcast. In each episode, I sit down with people who really know VAT, practitioners, managers, academics, policymakers, and consultants. We discuss what matters most for professionals who deal with VAT every day. But not just that, there are also solo episodes. In those, I break down complex VAT concepts step by step with clear practical advice you can apply immediately in practice. The Vadvocate Podcast has one simple mission: to deliver selected, reliable VAT knowledge in conversations that work for busy professionals. This podcast is for tax managers, advisors, lawyers, academics, policymakers, and judges, for everyone who wants to understand VAT and solve real VAT problems. Subscribe and follow the Vadvocate Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Vadvocate Podcast. This is the first episode of this podcast, and I am Paweł Mikuła. I'm partner and co-founder of Halcyon Tax Legal Customs Advisory. And today we welcome my guest, Rita de La Feria. Hello, Rita.
Hello. How are you?
Hello,
Paweł?
How are you? I'm good. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm good. End of the summer, beginning of the academic year approaches. So life is returning to normality.
Okay, perfect. First of all, I wanted to thank you for accepting this invitation. It's a great honor for me to have on this start of this podcast one of the most influential person in the tax world. So globally, I guess. So once more, it's an honor for me, and thank you for accepting this invitation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think you should tell our guests that we have known each other for many years when you were still a doctoral student and came and present your research to me and other academics that were part of the Innovat group. Joachim English, Eduardo Travessa, and the late Oscar Henko.
Exactly.
So it's many years now, and I'm delighted that you have made such a successful career post PhD. So I'm very happy to be here and to accept your invitation.
Thank you, thank you, and I'm also more even happier that you remember all those details. It was exactly as you mentioned. I remember being so stressed when I was presenting. It was in Durham, I believe, and I presented on my PhD thesis or PhD draft to you and all those distinguished member of the panel. So yeah, great experience, and I'm happy that you remember that. Thank you.
We're all really friendly.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
not scary at all.
No, I would maybe argue a little bit in a opposite direction. You were friendly, of course, but it was always challenging. I remember that it is very often something else that we come across when we, present in our countries, in our on our national universities, as you all, of course, noted that time that sometimes there are different practices in different universities in different European countries. So we don't have this kind of challenging panel that goes so much into details about your methodological side of things and so on, so on. And it was very, very fruitful. And I remember that, and I cite to other people the things that you said, that other panelists said during this presentation. It is very fruitful. Something that don't happen. It's something that doesn't happen on the universities that often.
Oh, I'm delighted that it was such a positive experience. So we should say to other doctoral students that want to have a positive experience and get feedback on their work to come and present at Innovat. So we're all very nice and friendly, and we provide constructive feedback for your dissertations.
Exactly. We invite everyone to follow Innovat and to take part in this. You didn't have the possibility, but I was attending this also this year in Brussels. So it happens. It happens every year, almost every year or every year. So please, dear audience, feel invited. Feel invited. There is always a conference and a PhD seminar.
Exactly.
Yeah, in a package, let's say. So it's a great opportunity. Yeah. Okay, so let me introduce you. I mean, everybody knows you, but just to summarize where you come from. You come from Portugal. You graduated from the University of Lisbon, right? You did your PhD thesis in Dublin at the Trinity College. It was on the EU VAT system versus internal market, right? That you published later. And what else? You were or are still research fellow at the University of Oxford? Are you still there?
Yeah, so I joined Oxford as a full-time research fellow. So at the time was as a postdoc, in essence, um, and that was now 18 years ago. And basically, I never fully left. So I joined
Okay.
at the time. It was a full-time position. I stayed full-time at Oxford. Then, from research fellow and postdoc, I moved to senior research fellow, and that was for 5 years. And then after that, I went straight for a professor position, a chair position, first at Durham, then at Leeds. But I never really completely left Oxford. I continue as an international research fellow at Oxford, and I teach in the MSc in taxation, so a master's program that Oxford offers, that was introduced in 2017, and I have been teaching at Oxford on that program since 2017, since it first started.
Yeah, okay. There is this great MSc program at Oxford in taxation. So for everybody to know who doesn't know it, there is this great program in which Rita takes part also. So and later you were a professor and chair of tax at the Durham University, and now professor and chair of tax law at the University of Leeds.
Correct.
Okay. And also you're advisor for different governments on tax policy and awarded many times for leading woman in taxes globally and leading tax person and tax academic, and every award that is possible in tax world you already got. So just to summarize, before we move on, I wanted to also ask you, what are your current most important interests or focus from the academic perspective, or what are you dealing with in the most part right now?
So when you start your career, you have one or two projects on the go.
Okay.
Well, at my stage, there's a lot of moving parts.
Okay.
The most recent work that has been published, as you might be aware, was the project on taxation and inequalities. That was a massive project. It took many years to prepare. So it involved 64 academics from 33 different countries, and I was leading the project. So it entails, in essence, everyone answering a questionnaire that I prepared, and then I basically put together the conclusions and identify the global trends and the tendencies of where we go from here. It has been extremely rewarding. The book was published by the IBFD in June, and I hope it will help people to think more carefully about fairness in taxation. We often use that word, that expression, fair taxation, without thinking, and it's actually quite a complex topic. So it sounds great in theory. In reality, there are many trade-offs which we identify in the project. So I that took me quite a big part of my time, and I hope it will be impactful, and it will make people think. Going forward, I'm also I have different areas where I'm working. So I have just finished a project, a small project on excise taxation and the global resurgence of excise taxes, with a co-author, a professor in Brazil. I have more work coming out, hopefully very soon, on the progressive VAT and the design of VAT bases with my co-author at the IMF, Arthur Swistak. I have a project on personal income taxes and labor mobility and the competitiveness, tax competition and personal income taxes with Georgia Maffini. And I have just started a new project as well on tax administration with an IMF colleague, Modestus, that is an expert in tax administration. So many areas of taxation.
A lot of things. I think you could continue for ages. I've heard also talked with Leopoldo Parada that also you have a project with him on tax avoidance, more from theoretical point of view or something like that. So
yes.
also this point. So I think you could go on.
Yes,
So it was the dangerous question.
Yeah. Probably it was, Pavel. Probably it was.
Yeah. But
yes.
it's a very concrete information that you just have a lot of different things.
Leopoldo probably talked about that, but that's a more long term. So this is why I didn't mention it now. Okay. But because it's a book, so it will take longer to finalize. But yes, we have a book that the contract has been signed, so I can be public about it. So it's called Tax Avoidance, a General Theory of Anti-Avoidance Mechanisms, and it will be published by Oxford University Press. Yes, it is a theoretical book about how different avoidance rules interact. We have seen a multiplication of anti-avoidance rules. How do they get taxes? How do they fit together? What is the hierarchy? What do you apply first? What takes precedent over what? Which is quite an interesting legal question that no one really, to our knowledge, has discussed. So
yeah, I felt a little bit excited when I saw the title, because I think that Leopoldo has in its project that are open, and yeah, I feel that no one has ever put on the table the comprehensive theoretical view on tax avoidance and all those relations that you're mentioning. So I'm very excited about this, but I understand I will need to wait a bit because it's a long term, right?
yeah, so it will be more than a year. It won't
Okay.
be 5 years, but but it's more than a year.
Okay.
So a bit to wait. But yes, exciting times.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned your book, Taxation and Inequalities. Exactly. So we will put a link to the IBFD page where you can check out the contents and you can buy the book. So it will be done. And also, based on that book, you had already, which I wanted to, inform our audience that you have a couple of podcasts already made concerning that book and concerning the inequalities, taxation inequality. You're pretty fruitful on that, equality versus taxation. So there are different materials also available with Rita on the internet. So we will try to link that. Yeah, so we really recommend that book. And initially, when I was planning to do the podcast with you, I was thinking about this book and concentrate on this. And we will, of course, do that, and we will come back to maybe touch on this and come back to this. But I just figured that finally, I structured this episode or questions to you in a manner that could be put under the title "Everything I Wanted to Ask Rita About VAT, but didn't have the opportunity to do that." Of course, it touches also on equality and fairness and so on to some extent. So we will come back to the book, but we will try, if you don't mind, try to do the walkthrough on the most important, at least from my perspective, current VAT topics from the general helicopter view policy perspective, because this is something that is most interesting. I think. How does that sound to you?
Great, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to talk with you about is the question that bothers me for some time, that why direct taxation is more important than VAT. Is it the case? Is it really the case? In a sense that I will explain what I mean. VAT, or generally speaking, GST, is a phenomenon that is implemented in 170 jurisdictions or so, or something like that around the world. It turns out to be very effective fiscal instrument. When you look at the revenues that are generated from taxes, VAT or GST are the tool that generates the most, or second the most, instrument to general public revenues, and so on. And still we see that most of the seminars, this is my impression, is on direct taxation, corporate income tax and direct taxation. I think that most of the advisory in the advisory world, not that VAT maybe is the second one, but generally direct taxation is the thing that the companies spend most money on, most resources on, and so on. And those VAT people are sometimes, even there are memes on that on the internet, that are some kind of secondary, let's say, on a secondary position, if you may put it that way. What are your impressions or comments about that? Is it the case, and if it is, why is that the case? Is it the case that the VAT is less important than direct taxation?
I think this is better answered with another question. It is important to whom? Because if you're talking about advisory, and if you're talking about even to the public, I would say that you're correct. So from an advisory perspective, it is definitely the case that corporate income tax has the highest salience. And for the public, I would say that income taxes generally have the highest salience. I would probably personal income tax is the highest salience of all, followed then by corporate. If you're talking from a public finance perspective, then of course that is not the case. So there, it is undeniably the case that VAT is more important. And it is also interesting to note that even for the public in the sense of reality as opposed to the public perceptions, but in reality, for the public, VAT is also more important.
Yeah.
But the public's perceptions is that personal income tax is more important. Why do I say VAT is more important from a public perspective? Because in actual fact, everyone pays VAT. And only a part of the population pays personal income taxes. So it depends. The estimates of how many people pay income taxes depends from country to country. I mean, if you have estimates are dependent in essence on how many people are above a certain level of income to be able to pay personal income taxes. But for example, in the UK is roughly half of the population pays and half of the population doesn't really pay because they get money back. But everyone literally pays VAT. And if you go to a developing country, the difference is even starker. So you could have maybe 10% of the population or 20% of the population paying personal income taxes, but literally everyone pays VAT. So even though public perceptions, income taxes are more important, in reality, even from a public perspective, VAT is more important. So in terms of public finance, in terms of reality for the tax burden of each individual, VAT is the most important tax. I think that there are various reasons why it has less, is perceived less importantly. First, of course, it is less obvious for the public. So, you know, everyone sees when they pay personal income tax and they paycheck at the end of the month.
Yeah, I remember that you tweeted a couple of years ago. I think that it was you that there was this survey on the streets of Britain. They asked people if you pay VAT, and like 70% told that they don't pay VAT, right? Normal people on the street. So it was like 70% or 80% that they don't pay VAT. So this is exactly the case. If you don't have to, you know, file the return and see the monies, of course they think they don't pay.
Yeah, so I think people confuse, the general public, as in not tax experts, confuse remittance with payment. And basically they associate filling a tax return with paying VAT, and not filling a tax return means you don't pay VAT. In reality, as we know, in consumption taxes, the two are dissociated. So the retailer collects the money, but it's the public that is paying, of course. But people don't see it like that. I think that is a key reason in terms of public, but it is also true that for companies, the advisory attention is driven by companies, and for companies, corporate income tax is obviously more evident because VAT is more neutral. And of course, we know. I'm preaching to the converted here, but you know that VAT is in reality not neutral to companies, but in theory is supposed to be neutral to companies. If it was well designed, it would be mostly neutral to companies.
This is actually, sorry for interrupting, because this is thing that I was thinking about for some time now. Of course, if it's neutral or not, it's a broader discussion. We will maybe come back to this, because from what point of view neutral, but neutrality realizes itself to some extent in this part, because CIT influences the financial result pretty often directly and so on. So the managing persons are very interesting whether you pay CIT or not, because it influences their money directly, let's say. And in this sense, the neutrality of VAT is to some extent visible, that they don't care because it doesn't influence their, of course, in some sectors, consumer, maybe it does to some extent, but generally it does not influence the financial result. So they are not that interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
So in this sense, in some sense of neutrality, the neutrality realizes itself in this manner, I think.
Yes, and you see that the companies that seek a lot of advisory on VAT, there is a direct correlation with industries that have exemptions, for example.
Exactly.
So industries that have
exemptions or different rates, or
indeed
direct the relation with the consumer, where it influences your margin and so on. The rest, not so much.
Yeah, so you see that direct correlation between in areas that it is the VAT is less neutral because of the exemptions or because of the reduced rates, but exemptions is very obvious, for example, on the financial services industry. In industries that are less neutral, you see an increase on advisory procurement. So there is an obvious relationship between the neutrality and the salience of the tax, and the importance that it's given by advisory. And then, of course, if you're working on that area, of course, you give more attention. So you want to go to seminars on that topic or conferences, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Exactly.
So it becomes a vicious circle of attention. You're seeking more attention, then there's a market to give you that attention, etc., because they're meeting your demand for support. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So is it worth, when you're speaking with your students or graduates or young associates, let's say, is it worth dealing with VAT, or it's better to go, if you, I know that you will say that it depends, maybe, but generally, do you recommend to go into VAT or other taxes because VAT is neutral?
VAT in reality is not neutral, so
okay, that's the first thing. That's the first point.
So there is a lot of opportunities on that score. If it was for me, from a policy perspective, it would be more neutral, so less opportunities, I guess, for advisory and advocacy. But I really do combat in the real world. I do combat all the time the focus on income taxes, and I do it because I think it's completely disproportionate. So I understand why it is the case that we give more importance. I think even for the public, this focus on corporate income tax is this kind of wish for others to pay taxes that not you. So we want more taxes to be paid, but by someone else.
But not, but someone else, not by
obviously
us.
Not by us. So obviously forgetting that corporate income taxes will appear somehow on your prices or on lower salaries or etc. I mean, it is always an individual that pays taxes, whoever that individual is. So obviously I understand the reasons why this is the case, but I combat it in the real world, and I do try to say, yes, consumption taxes are. It's not only that they are more important, but the way things are going, I think their importance will only increase. I think the writing is on the wall.
So the increase in the importance of consumption taxes.
Yes. Okay. So I think that is unavoidable as things stand. I mean, that could be, a global catastrophe tomorrow. And as things stand, I think an increased emphasis on consumption taxes, and not just VAT. When I say consumption taxes, I'm talking VAT, but also excises. It is unavoidable. Because corporate income tax was already very difficult to charge. So, I mean, what we see, if you look historically, obviously, is this tax competition in corporate income tax, and you have, taxes in the 1960s being at 40%, and now the average is somewhere in the 20%. The OECD average on corporate income tax rate is about 20%. Of course, the effective tax rate hasn't decreased at the same pace because the base has enlarged, but broadly speaking, if effective tax rates have decreased over time on capital, and that's because of the movement of capital, globalization, right? We are in the beginning of the same processes, I think, on labor, and we are seeing now the beginning of tax competition on personal income taxes, and I think it was happening already pre-pandemic, but the pandemic significantly accelerated this process. So what we're seeing now is a massive tendency to offer special preferential regimes to attract high-skilled, high-income individuals. And this is, in essence, the process we saw in the 60s and the 70s for capital. And we are now seeing it for personal income. Now, unless something changes, the likelihood is that things will go in the same path as corporate income tax has gone. And if that is the case, revenue will have to come from somewhere. And the obvious answer, also because it has less public salience and less political economy resistance, would be VAT and excise taxes. So as things stand, so the importance of VAT is directly correlated with what happens on other taxes, right? So the less other taxes are reliable, the more VAT becomes the reliable source of the revenue. So we cannot see. This is something I try to tell to my students. So I'm going in a half, like I'm going all around to answer your question. But what I tell often my students is that you can't see one tax in isolation. You have to look at the whole tax system. And one tax, what happens in one tax is dependent on what happens in other taxes. And if you see what is happening in corporate income tax or has happened over the last few decades, and you're seeing the same pattern happening now on personal income taxes, then the obvious conclusion is that if you look at the tax mix, then the emphasis will have to come on other taxes. And the other taxes, the obvious answer is obviously VAT. The second answer would be probably an increase in excise taxes, also because on the excise taxes, we are seeing a bigger emphasis on regulatory aims. So we want the tax system to achieve not just revenue, but to achieve other things, like with environmental taxes. If you put those two factors together, what I see is we need more experts on consumption taxes, on VAT, on excise taxes, because first of all, there is less of them now. So there is more opportunities in a way, because, everyone understands corporate income tax or personal income tax. That is a tax expert, but less people understand consumption taxes. But also because going forward, I see more and more emphasis on those taxes.
Okay. So generally, there will be your estimation is that, or observation that there will be less significance, and because of that, interest in direct taxation and consumption taxation is something to focus on.
I think from a public finance perspective is undeniable. I think from an advisory perspective, we are not seeing that because the mess is so big on corporate and personal that advisory is growing just because no one understands very well what is happening. This is anyone that is in practice will tell you this on pillar 2, that the demand for advisory has increased because companies feel a bit lost about what is happening. So from a public finance perspective, undeniably that this is the trend. I think that on advisory, I think that the trend in terms of growth for consumption is also there, but I don't necessarily think that it will be accompanied by a decrease on demand for advisory on income. Not because it's as important in public finance, but because it's such a mess. So I think that there will still be many opportunities for advisory and income.
I was also thinking, does automatization or digitalization of taxes influence this, in a sense that we are looking what happens with the automatization and digitalization, and I imagine a world where where companies' ERP systems are directly in real time connected with tax authorities, and there is a instant and constant data exchange between the financial system of the company, of the enterprise, of the legal person, and the tax authorities. So again, less work. Presumably, I don't know, for people that will have to deal with this. And I was just thinking, if in that sense, indirect taxes are more prone to digitalization and automatization than direct taxation. Can you say that, or we just don't know, because it may be pretty much the same, because automatization and digitalization also happens in direct taxation. So maybe it's not a good way of thinking about this problem this way.
I think it's the impact of digitalization and automation is probably more obvious at the moment for VAT, because a lot of countries, including Poland, which is your home country, and my home country, which is Portugal, have introduced real-time technology, which makes sales pretty much automated and sent in real time to the tax administration. So it's probably more obvious, but I don't think you can say that in the medium to long term that it will affect more consumption. I think it will affect realistically all compliance.
In Poland, the corporate income tax safety file also is introduced right now, and you will have to, not maybe in real time, but on every demand, or in certain periods of on a recurring basis, you will need to report. So it's fair to say that it happens also in corporate income taxation, maybe as a second step, as you are mentioning. But yeah, maybe it's a general phenomenon in taxation, or in a world generally. The automatization, digitalization, maybe not necessarily it is something that concerns only indirect taxation. Yeah.
Yeah. So and you're talking about corporate, but this is also transferable to personal. So one of the things that is being discussed in the UK is for people that so the majority of UK taxpayers do not file tax returns, personal income tax returns. It's automatically deducted from their salaries. So the only people that have to file tax returns are people that have any type of income that is beyond employment income, which is a minority of the population. For those people, the discussion in the UK is about basically making various reporting periods that are not an annual. So every quarter, or even there could be my monthly reporting of that type of income on So like that level of automation, it's not, as you say, real time, but it is spreading to other taxes. It might have started with VAT, but it will quickly spread. So I think the biggest difference is not on different types of taxes, but on the different type of tax work. So I think compliance is more susceptible to be automated, of course. So the work that when I started on taxes 25 years ago, there were loads of people that did literally just compliance work. That was obviously never my case, because I come from a law background, but a lot of people did just that work. I think that type of business is fading away because of technology. But I think that in terms of the more sophisticated advisory legal work, I think that will continue regardless of automation and every taxes.
Yeah, great. Because sometimes we see what happens here and now, and you're giving us the broader perspective. Because when we sit here and now, we see all those VAT in the digital age package, and we see when there is a newsletter on VAT, there are 13 points of new mandates of invoicing in every different countries of the world. So so maybe you might think that VAT is ending because the digitalization covers everything, but it's not the case. It's a general phenomenon, not only indirect taxation.
But can I make an extra point, Pavel? So I thought you were going to ask me something completely different. So
Okay.
So you started saying about automation, and because we had been talking about VAT versus other taxes, I thought that you were going to say, is automation going to impact on how much personal income tax we collect? And that means that VAT will be given more emphasis. And I was thinking about the robotization and so on, and the disappearance of low-skilled workers in certain industries. I thought that that's where you're going to go. And you went on a completely different topic. But
if you have any remarks, just show remarks on the topic that you just mentioned. Please tell us about it.
I thought that you were going to talk about that, because I think that this is a big issue. So you mentioned in the beginning that I had recorded a podcast on tax fairness. That I had recorded a couple of podcasts, and one of them was recorded with for Tax Chats, which is hosted by two US-based tax professors. And before I did that episode with Jeff and Scott, I had done an episode on taxing robots. And that had been based on a project I had done a couple of years ago with Amparo Grau from the University Complutense of Madrid, and a bunch of computer scientists and robotics experts, etc. So the team was very big, but we were the two tax law people on the team. And in that project, what we looked at is this idea that you could tax robots, because automation is growing, and a lot of industries will see a decrease in employment in the immediate term. So productivity, AI will, and automation generally will increase productivity in the medium to long term. But in the short term, it will create labor displacement. So people in certain industries, low-skilled jobs primarily will disappear. People will, in some regions, might be more affected than others, etc. So there is this constant call for, should we be taxing robots to substitute for personal income taxes? And I won't. This is a podcast about VAT, not about personal income taxes. But in the project, we conclude that this is just not doable, both from an economics perspective, but also
not doable taxing robots.
Yes, taxing robots, but also from a purely legal perspective. I mean, we cannot. The first obstacle from a legal perspective is that it's almost impossible to define robots. So you can't tax what you can't define. And if you can't say to me, what is the exactly that is it that you want to tax? What is a robot for legal purposes? Is a washing machine a robot? Is it sufficient level? What is the level of automation and sophistication that you draw the line and which you're going to tax or you're not going to tax? So is it just that it has to look like a human? So what about all that automation that is going on factories across the world that doesn't look like a human? It just is a computer chip. Does that count as a robot? So anyway, I won't dwell on it, but we conclude that it's not possible. But then what I discuss on the podcast is, so I convinced Scott and Jeff that we couldn't tax robots. And then the obvious answer is, so where is the money going to come from? Mm-hmm. And that is like a second order question, as we say. So it's as economists.
But isn't it that it's going to come from the revenue generated by the owner of the robot?
Not necessarily. So this is a one possibility. So we increase tax on capital, right? But then it hasn't been easy to tax capital over the last 40 years.
Sure,
Right?
sure.
So it's not obvious where it's going to come from. So then we started thinking. I mean, this is like a different podcast with what it concluded. But like there's a whole. And I thought that when you started with this conversation, I thought that you're going to say to me, should we just plug it with VAT? So is it possible that automation is going to increase the importance of VAT? And I think that is a real possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So going back to the other point,
but it is strictly connected to what we are talking about and with VAT. So it's of course good that you mention it. So generally speaking, robotization may also influence the revenues from the VAT.
Yeah. So robotization will might also have as a consequence a higher reliance on VAT revenues and a need to increase VAT or give more importance to VAT or to excises to basically fill the hole left by personal income taxes lost due to the robotization and automation of some jobs, particularly low skill or particularly in some regions, etc. Until the productivity gains kick in. So it might be that, 20 years from now, we are able finally to tax capital or, people are also rich that they all paying more personal income tax. I don't know. But during this transition period, it is possible that automation and robotization also will lead to a higher increase on the reliance on consumption taxes, particularly VAT, but also excise.
Yeah. Again, we come to the conclusion that consumption taxes are the future, right, in taxation.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So another thing that I always wanted to ask you: what are the advantages and disadvantages of VAT? I know that it's a long story, and you could go on for ages again. But if you were to name, like I don't know, three main advantages of VAT.
Okay, so the classic answer to this is it's efficient.
Efficient from the point of view
from an
of
economic
generating
efficiency, from an economic efficiency perspective. So it doesn't interfere with labor with allocation of factors of production. So you can make rational decisions and increase welfare by not having taxes interfering with the tax with the economic decisions, and it's neutral also from an investment perspective on exports versus imports, etc. So the classic answer is efficiency, neutrality, and revenue reliability, which includes not only the fact that it's very good on collecting revenue, but it's also that it's less susceptible to being influenced by business cycles. So it's not only that that is a good source of revenue, but it's a reliable, steady source of revenue. Of course, any tax is always impacted by business cycles. So you collect less when there is a downturn and you collect more when there is growth. But VAT is less influenced by the downturns than other taxes. So these are the classic answers to your question.
This is a classic answer. And less classic answer?
The less classic answer is that the classic answer is a good answer. But is dependent on the design of the VAT. So in theory, VAT has these advantages. In practice, two of them can be severely hampered by bad legal design. So it is the case that VAT will always collect revenue, and it is relatively impervious to business cycles. It is less true to say that VAT is always efficient and from an economics perspective and always neutral. Because what we see in real VATs is that badly designed VAT can be highly non-neutral and can be highly inefficient. And that really is dependent on how you design the tax how complex the legislation is, of course, how good the legal drafting is, etc. But a lot of it, and I'm sure you will want to talk about it, how the base is designed. So do you have exemptions? Do you have reduced rates, etc.? And you see immediately decrease on efficiency. You see immediately decrease on neutrality as soon as you introduce those elements. So the real answer is, the classic answer is true on a well-designed VAT. It can be not true, and it often is not true on a badly designed VAT. The disadvantages, the biggest disadvantage, again, the classic answer is, the biggest disadvantage is that it's regressive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, here also qualification. The classic answer is generally true. So classic tends to be classic for a reason. Like cliches are cliches for a reason.
Yeah.
Because there is always a source of truth to those cliches.
Yeah.
And it is true that VAT can be regressive. Now, it's not as regressive as people think. And it depends how that regressivity is measured. Economists will often tell you that if you measure it by, lifetime consumption, it won't be like richer people will always pay more, because in essence, all income is deferred consumption. You basically save the money, but you're going to spend it later on, etc. So it's not, I won't get into the details, but it's not as regressive as people think it is. But there is an element of regressivity, particularly when savings kick in. So if you consume, so I often show this to my students, like a sterilized graph. If you consume all that you earn, assuming that you have a single rate of VAT and no exemptions, having a flat rate income tax or having a flat rate VAT is exactly the same.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you consume everything that you earn, right?
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you have savings, that changes, because savings are not taxed under a VAT. Now, if those savings are very big, and if you're not going to spend that money ever, and you're going to pass it to your kids and you invest it, etc., that's when the regressivity problem kicks in.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so it's not as regressive as people think, but there is a regressivity. The issue is that in order to address that problem, we have created this bigger problem of introducing exemptions and reduced rates of VAT. Now, the New Zealanders in the 1980s gave us the solution to this problem and how to address the VAT regressivity. You basically do direct transfers, welfare transfers to those who are the poorest. Unbelievably, in the last 40 years, that model has not spread. There is a few countries that apply.
So we will come back to this, because it's, of course, I have also a question on that, on the regressivity and the way to, avoid it in direct transfers and so on. But coming back to also disadvantages, isn't it the case, because also the cliche or the classic answer, as I think, is that the VAT is more prone to fraud? Is it true? I mean, for example, isn't it the discussion in the US, for example, around that problem also, whether to introduce VAT or not? In other words, aren't they afraid of all the frauds when debating whether to introduce it or not, or it's not just, or it's not a real problem that is debated when you're trying to implement VAT in a given jurisdiction?
Qualified answer. If you're asking me, is it true that VAT is susceptible to fraud? Then the answer is undeniably yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you're asking me if VAT is more prone to fraud than other taxes, then the answer is no.
Okay. Clear. Yeah.
So I know that this argument is often made because, basically because of lobby groups that don't want change, and there is a path dependency.
Okay.
And in the US, everyone is used to the retail sales tax, and no one wants to change, because basically change means that you have to learn new things.
Yeah.
And no one likes new things. Everyone likes the food that their mother used to make when they were 5.
Yeah.
So
there is always cost of change,
yes,
right?
of course, there's
Yeah.
always a cost to changes. So this is identified in economics since the 1950s. It's known as a status quo bias. So people like what they know because there is a cost to change. Anyway, so in the US, there's an element of that. But this discussion is often said in absolute terms. Yes, VAT is acceptable to fraud. We know in Europe with missing trader fraud, for example, and the reported sales tends to be the biggest issue with small and medium-sized enterprises. So SMEs tends to be the biggest issue. In reality, in terms of comparatively, we know. So this is not debated. We know that VAT is a lot less acceptable to fraud than other similar taxes. So VAT is a lot less susceptible to fraud than retail sales tax in the US. And it's not even like it's not comparable. And the reason why this is the case, it's because VAT has, in theory, the same economic effects as a retail sales tax. They are taxed on consumption. They are taxed on final consumers. But VAT is collected in a different way than retail sales tax. Retail sales tax collects everything at the last stage. VAT collects it in different stages. Why is this different? Is different because of 2 reasons. First of all, because basically VAT spreads the risk of fraud throughout the production chain. So when something happens, some fraudulent activity happens in VAT, you lose a part of the revenue. When something wrong happens in retail sales tax, you lose all of the revenue because it's all of the consumption that is not taxed, whilst in VAT is a little part of the chain. So the risk is spread on the VAT throughout the production chain. The second reason why it is less prone to fraud is because in VAT, a lot of the VAT is collected on B2B transactions. And there is no incentive to avoid VAT or to make fraudulent activities on B2B unless you are a missing trader. So excluding organized fraud, there is no incentive to commit fraud. The incentive to commit fraud of the informality type is on the B2C transaction, is on the last stage of the production chain, right? Now, in VAT, that is only one of the stages. But in retail sales tax, that is precisely the stage where all the tax is collected. So it's not only that VAT spreads the risk, but is that retail sales tax concentrates all of the collection in the most dangerous stage of the production chain, which is the stage where there is a very real possibility of collusion, in which the seller tells the buyer in the classic way that everyone in the world, I haven't had one single student from any country in the world that doesn't know this sentence, would you like an invoice?
Yeah,
which means in every part of the world, do you want to be taxed
so
or not?
It's not a problem of Poland, Slavic countries, or everywhere.
No.
It's everywhere.
No, it happens. It doesn't matter if the student is Chinese or Colombian.
Okay, so
or Nigerian.
everyone had
as soon as I say that in my classes,
auto mechanic or plumber or everyone that it's going to
knows
be
the sentence.
It's 100. It's 100. But if you want an invoice, it's 122.
They don't even. So this is actually quite interesting from a social perspective, right? I often see all these debates about immigration and how people are very different. And obviously, this is not a podcast about that; it's about taxes. But it always strikes me how similar we all are. Of course, there are many cultural differences. But I travel a lot, and I travel to all parts of the world. And it always strikes me how really at the bottom, we're all very similar.
Yeah.
And so what is interesting about this story is that you don't actually need to explain. So in every part of the world, all you need to say is, do you want an invoice?
Yeah.
And literally everyone understands that is a code to, do you want to be charged tax or do you not want to be charged tax?
And now a short break and a quick tip, because we have prepared something special for you. It's a Court of Justice VAT rulings database. It contains all VAT judgments and orders issued since the 70s, with search, keywords and links. And not just that, the best thing is that the database will be updated periodically. And how to get it? By subscribing to our free VAT newsletter, link in the description. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast for more VAT discussions like this one.
It's for many reasons, anthropological and sociological and everything that you mentioned. It's very, do you want an invoice? It's so interesting. Lately, yesterday, I saw a post again on this, on LinkedIn, or someone posted it. And I had always this reflection on this, that, you know what, in Poland, I guess also in other countries, the best part is that those people really, in the bottom of their heart, don't know that it's like ethically or morally wrong. I mean that there is this perception that it's a normal choice, it's a tax option, right? That it's a normal thing to, if you want an invoice, it's okay, and it's going to be more expensive. And if you don't, it's okay, but it's going to be less expensive. It's just a choice that you make. So all I'm saying is that sometimes, you know, it's always said on the lectures on penal fiscal law at the universities that you know, everybody knows that killing a man is a wrong thing, but not all the society knows that not taking the receipt or invoice is something wrong, right? So that's of course different topic, right, on psychology and everything, but on sociology or something, but that's my impression that of course it changed throughout last 20 years. It changed totally. There were huge in Poland, for example, campaigns of the Ministry of Finance, information campaigns, and it also concerns the missing trader fraud and the other behaviors in the market. So of course our awareness right now is completely different than it used to be, but still there is a huge amount of people that truly doesn't know that it's something illegal or it's something wrong.
Okay, so I'll make two observations to what you just said. First of all, let's tell a funny story, and then I'll say the more serious stuff. So the funny story is a year ago or so, or a year and a half ago or so, I actually told this story on social media because it was so funny at the time. So a tradesman comes to fix my French windows. And at the end, he tells my husband the usual sentence, "Would you like an invoice?" And my husband basically smiled and said, "I think that's better." And then when my husband said that sentence, I think that's better, and smiled, the tradesman tried, one more step and said, "But you understand, just in case my husband hadn't understood the code." He said, "But you understand that means that you will pay VAT." And I have to put, and my husband said, "Yes, that's fine. But, my wife is a tax policy expert." And they said, "Oh, okay. So I'll send you." So a few days later, my husband receives by email the invoice from the tradesman, and he sees VAT at 20%.
Yeah.
But my husband, who is now a professor of criminology, started his career many years ago as a tax person. He hated. So he left after 1 year, but enough of his tax training stayed, right? So we looked at the invoice, and there was something odd about the invoice. And then he realized there was no VAT number. The tradesman was not registered for VAT. He just charged my husband extra 20%.
That's even funnier. Yeah, that's completely beyond everything that we talk about.
It's insane, right? So he just made an extra 20% profit.
So yeah, so with invoice, that's what I'm saying. With invoice, it's more expensive. But if I remit it or not to the tax authority, it's completely different story. Everybody knows that with invoice, it's just more expensive, right?
Yeah, so in essence, basically, my husband was paying, or we were paying indirectly for his increase in income tax, because now he has to declare that income as turnover, right? Anyway, so that was the funny story. Now the more serious answer. The more serious answer is that last year I published a paper with a group of political scientists from Canada and the US. Three colleagues from Montreal and one colleague from Harvard. And the paper basically looks at precisely this issue: perceptions of fraudulent activities by small businesses. So forget about the big companies. And just give an example of this type of situation. So on one of our experiments was a restaurant, the other was a mechanic. And the idea was to have to understand how if people perceived fraud, if they realized that it was fraudulent, if you basically didn't declare the sale. Right? So exactly what we're talking about here of invoice versus no invoice. And the experiment was done by a survey company. So it was completely done, like anonymously with a big statistical representation from the population. So completely free of biases in the US and in France. And we were staggered with the results, I can tell you. As in people over 90%, so over 9 in 10 people realized that tax fraud was being committed. So they identified correctly that it was fraud, and they identified it correctly as it was wrong.
Okay.
So we were very surprised. We thought, so we were trying to identify what is known. So I won't bore your listeners with too much literature on this issue, but we were trying to identify an immigration bias, which is well known in welfare payments literature. So we were very surprised when we realized that no one now accepts these actions as good. So tax fraud is now unacceptable. Now, when you ask people, do you think it's being committed? Then the numbers increase massively. So people say it's wrong, but everyone does it. So this is basically the picture.
Most importantly, it's something contrary to what I said, because your research, your studies show that people identify those deeds as wrong, right?
Yes, in the US and in France. So this is an important qualification. So, because what we think is happening is that there is a progression in seeing that this is wrong, but it hasn't reached every culture yet, every country, etc. This is a process. We are witnessing a process of denormalization. So committing tax fraud is now being denormalized. So it's no longer regarded as normal, no longer regarded as acceptable. It's now progressively being regarded as unacceptable. But it's a process, and there will be cultural differences for sure in different countries. But this, even in the US and in France, this would not have been the case 20 years ago. So pre-financial crisis. And we think that is a process that is related with the higher salience of taxes. So we talk more now about fraud. There is more news. Yeah. So since the financial crisis, there's more awareness. So we think that it's related to that. But I can tell you now that in our experiment, the tax fraud is now regarded as unacceptable. That this type of tax fraud, this type of, small businesses, which, like you were saying, when we were growing up, it was completely normalized. People thought, you committed fraud, good for you. So you're not paying taxes, good for you. You're the smart person in the room, right? But now this is no longer the case.
I remember the story. It's on a side note, but Marta Papis told me the story when she moved to Sweden. She had this had this situation where she asked other friends where to go to the hairdresser, and one of the colleagues said that this street is pretty good, but the other said don't go there because he does not pay taxes. And it was in Sweden, so it is completely something for me. It's surprising, right? It's not normal. Maybe it's a kind of Scandinavian culture or something like that. But it's interesting that people recommend hairdresser because he pays or not taxes. So this is
So I think there's two dimensions to this. So one, it's not just a Scandinavian thing. So I can tell you, for example, that my husband doesn't want to go to restaurants that won't accept digital payments. And the reason is obviously cash payments are more susceptible to fraud. And he's always suspicious when he sees an ad on a door saying we don't
Only
take cash, we don't take card payments. My husband immediately suspects, and he basically doesn't want to go. So I don't think, and it's not me basically pushing this. It's him, and he's not a tax person, as I said now, and that's because he thinks that is fundamentally unfair. Basically, for some restaurants or some bars not to pay and others to pay. So I don't think it's a Scandinavian thing. I think it's spreading this consciousness. And my husband is Irish, so he's not Scandinavian. The second thing I think it's worth saying is that this is connected with what is known in the literature as tax morale, people's willingness to pay taxes. So we know that tax morale is higher in Scandinavian countries. So people see the correlation between paying taxes and maintaining a social welfare and high standard of public services.
Yeah.
So the willingness for people to pay taxes is higher, and the tolerance for people that don't pay taxes is lower, because they see that if you don't pay taxes, then in essence, who is going to pay for the hospitals, the free public transport, et cetera, So I think that this unacceptability of tax fraud is also related with tax morale. And countries that we know that tax morale is heavily correlated with the standard of public services, countries that have high standard of public services and high standard of welfare, social welfare, like Scandinavian countries, have a higher tax morale than countries where public services are of a lower standard.
Okay, perfect. There are other questions I wanted to ask you. So maybe not sure if we will cover everything, but the topic that you already touched upon, regressivity of VAT. Can you explain to people who are very busy what is that? What is regressive? Because we know that VAT is regressive. You told already something on that, but in simple terms, what is VAT is regressive. What does it mean?
When we say a tax is regressive, whether it's VAT or any other tax, because, for example, excise taxes are also regressive. So when we say VAT is regressive or a tax is regressive, what we mean is that paying taxes puts a heavier burden on people on lower incomes than people on high incomes. It doesn't mean that in absolute terms they pay more. So let's imagine a person that earns 100 and a person A, and a person that earns 1,000, person B. If both of them buy shopping, they will pay VAT. Let's imagine a flat rate tax. They will pay VAT on their shopping, right?
10%.
Let's
the
imagine
person A
10%.
and person B. Yeah, whatever.
So 10% of their income is spent on VAT. Now, if you spend everything that you have earned, the person that is on 100, person A, will pay 10. And the person that is on 1,000, person B, will pay 100.
Exactly.
So the person B the richer person is spending more anyway, and therefore paying more VAT. So one paid 100 of VAT, the other paid 10. So the richer person paid more VAT. But it is a lower percentage, it is a lower part of their income that is spent on that.
So it's in relation to income, right? You earn more, but
so
you
you
pay
have more
less
left
in.
over.
Yeah. In one of the senses. Yeah.
In economic terms, there is the marginal utility of the income that is left. So what you can do with the income that is left is much higher for person B. Now, let's imagine. So this is basically, the two of them are paying the same percentage, right? Now, let's imagine the person B that earns 1,000 actually doesn't want to spend all of their income because they are comfortable. They only spend 900 of their income and they save 100, right? In that case, they will pay 90 of VAT, whilst the person A will still pay the 10, right? Now, the person B now is paying still a lot more than the person A. But now they're only paying 9% of their salary, their income, whilst the person A is still paying 10%.
Mm-hmm.
The burden of the tax is
because
higher.
The person B saved 100. Saved
right?
100.
So this is why I was saying earlier that the regressivity, and if you spend everything, it's like a proportional flat rate tax. Yeah. But as soon as savings kick in, the tax becomes regressive. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, economists will tell you that if you save that money this month, but next month you spend it, or you spend it next year, you're still paying the 10% of your income. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The issue is that when you're talking about higher amounts, you could be saving for many years, or you could buy I don't know, you can basically invest it in the stock market and then your kids get the inheritance, right? In that case, there is no consumption tax at all, ever, on that income. And there is a regressivity there that in my opinion, this is not a universal opinion. A lot of economists will tell you this should be ignored. In my opinion, it can't be ignored. Now, the issue is then how do you resolve this regressivity problem? Right. And the way we have done it is through reduced rates and exemptions.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So we have regressive, and we are trying to avoid this with lower taxes and exemptions. And I know your work. You argue that it's not the case. It does not influence, or it does not avoid regressivity.
That's not my argument. My argument is that it may not affect regressivity, but even where it does affect regressivity, the costs are too high because the effect is very small. So if you take food, for example, if you introduce reduced rates for food, it often will decrease the regressivity of the tax. But it's a small decrease in the regressivity. And this is because, people on higher incomes consume a lot more food than people on lower incomes, not in quantitative terms, but in price terms. And price VAT, terms. Of course, is ad valorem tax. So it's a tax on price. So if you buy rice that is a cheap brand of rice, you pay less VAT. If you buy same rice package, but a more expensive, higher quality brand, then you pay more VAT. So in essence, people on higher incomes save a lot more VAT when there is a reduced rate, assuming that the price is lower, which, as we know, it is often not the case. But assuming that the price is lower because of the VAT reduction, the person who is on higher incomes will save a lot more money. So there is a decrease in regressivity, but the dead weight loss, so what you have, the cost that you have paid in terms of revenue for making the poor person pay a little bit less VAT is very big, because the rich person will pay a lot less VAT.
So the effect on regressivity is not that big, and the public revenue are significantly lower.
Correct. Now, if you take other exemptions or other reduced rates, the regressivity actually might increase. So in the work I have done with Artur Swistak, another Polish national, we looked at basically different types of exemptions and different types of reduced rates. So for example, if you introduce VAT reduced rates on books, the regressivity of the tax can increase.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because people on lower incomes do not buy books.
Mm-hmm.
So when you introduce a reduced rate on VAT on books, who are you exempting or who are you decreasing the price for is people on higher incomes. Now, a lot of the times you will say, people will say that are supportive of this, even beyond the lobbies. So just general people will say, yes, but, everyone should buy books. Buying books is aspirational, right? So we should encourage people to buy books. I said, sure. I too love books, right? And a lot of my income goes on books. But if you look at the numbers, that's not actually what happens. It doesn't matter if you take VAT away, people on lower incomes still are not buying books. So when de facto, when you apply a reduced rate, when you apply an exemption, you are taxing less the richer person like me and you who do buy books. So no one is seeing the Pavel's background, but it's full of books. Full of books. The money that he has saved on buying all those books, listeners, I tell you, there's a lot of euros in that shelf saved, thanks to reduced rates. So this is what is happening in reality. So my argument is, if you want to increase literacy, and if you want to encourage people on lower incomes to buy books or to read, not necessarily to buy books, to read, then it's better to basically offer free libraries, for example, on deprived areas. So you are more effectively reaching those on lower incomes through the expenditure side, through creating reading spaces on poorer neighborhoods than you are through exempting people like me. Now, I often say to my students, this is the same, for example, when you think about cultural activities, which in the whole of Europe are exempt from VAT. Who goes to the theater? Who goes to the opera? I mean,
not the poorest one. Yeah.
I mean, if for books, we are talking maybe the top 10% of the income distribution, or the top 15% in Europe, maybe, if you're lucky. When you're talking about cultural events, it's even less. I like those cultural events, right? So I actually do go to a lot of cultural events, concerts, classical music, theater. I particularly like the opera. But when I look around, I often feel, oh my God, wouldn't this be better served if, for example, schools were allowed to take, 15-year-olds to the opera, rather than trying to encourage by an exemption.
And another example you mentioned somewhere on one of the podcasts regarding exemption on the schools, right? That they are exempted, but rich people use private schools which are exempted. So nobody is paying VAT on schools, but the regressivity is influenced by the fact that the rich people use the private exempted schools. So this is the same mechanism, right?
Yes. So it's the same for hospitals. So when you say, healthcare, education, everyone thinks, oh, of course, we shouldn't tax that, right? But then the issue is very simple, is that when you're taxing the private form of that. And who actually uses private hospitals? Who actually uses private schools? People at the top of the income distribution. So when you look at those exemptions, they increase the regressivity of the tax, because you're just exempting people on higher incomes. Now, often when I say this up to policymakers, they will say something along the lines, oh, not in my country. Because in my country, the public service is so bad that everyone goes to private hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have I heard this sentence? Oh, everyone goes to private because it's so bad in the public. And my response to that is, what you just said does not tell me that is the case in your country. It tells me that everyone around you is on the top of the income distribution.
Yeah, of course.
So because you look at the statistics and that is just not true. So you look at the consumption data from countries and that say that, and then you see that it's not true. It's only people at the top of the income distribution. Why do we think that that's the case? Because everyone around us is doing the same thing, right? So our barometer, our perception is distorted because we are comparing it not with the overall population, but with people around us. So our perception of who uses these services is distorted by our social group. And by nature, people that are listening to this podcast will be at the top of the income distribution.
Most probably.
Unless they are students.
So these are arguments on why reduced rates and exemptions influence regressivity in the way that we are positively, in a sense that it increases regressivity of VAT. And now I understand that your solution to this is to redistribution or public payments to those poor. Can you say just 2 sentences on this?
So in the 1980s, New Zealand introduced the GST, which is their VAT, the goods and services tax. And they realized that reduced rates and exemptions, the model that was used in Europe, VAT was great, but that model gave rise to loads of problems. So we go back to the cost that I was saying. So it's not just the loss of revenue, but as you know, there is a lot of litigation around the borders of what is exempt and what is reduced rate. It creates a lot of economic distortions. So the New Zealanders came up with a different way of doing this. So they said, okay, instead of applying reduced rates or exemptions, we're going to apply a flat rate VAT or GST, and we're going to compensate those on lower incomes by doing direct welfare transfers to them. So people on an income below a certain level get compensated for VAT paid at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter by direct welfare payments. And genuinely, if you talk to New Zealanders, tax experts, they will tell you that the VAT creates very little problems precisely because it is so neutral, because it doesn't make those distinctions. But the model didn't spread. So there are countries that use this method. So in Portugal, we had a sectorial application of this method for VAT on electricity and utilities. So there was a compensation for people on lower incomes when VAT was increased on electricity and gas, so energy products. Canada also has a compensation system for food, etc. Although they do still have some exemptions. So they have a general VAT welfare system, but it's a hybrid between the European model and the New Zealand model. But it is fair to say that the model hasn't spread. And when I started doing policy work, my big question was, why not? I mean, every economist in the world is telling you that this is better. That this is more targeted. You lose less revenue. You can more effectively, there is no dead weight loss on people on high incomes. You can basically tax the rich with the VAT and still protect the poor.
But it's difficult to explain through political discourse.
That's basically it. So what I realized after several years of having the same arguments done to me over and over again is that this is a political economy problem. It's not an equity problem. So we solved the equity problem in the 80s, but people just don't believe you. So there is no point on saying this. And there is many examples of politicians trying to increase VAT, and, you know, the backlash population-wise is really strong. The latest case we had on a massive scale was in Colombia, that tried to do a massive VAT reform where they the proposal was to implement a New Zealand type system with VAT compensation scheme. And what happened was the VAT compensation scheme, so the welfare payments went ahead, but the government had to remove the part of the legislation that introduced the one single rate of VAT. So They now
So
are
they
paying
introduced
twice.
okay.
They introduced the compensation but maintained the reduced rates and
But
exemption.
but they didn't manage even to eliminate some of those
No,
reduced.
no.
No, okay.
Because basically, literally, there was like protests on the street. So it wasn't
Okay.
like a backlash
Okay.
on the media. It was
So
like
it's a real thing,
like it's a real thing.
empirically tested already, right?
Yeah. So it's there's no denying. So it's just basically
So
people were on the street.
when you try to touch on VAT rates, it can end
So
up with the protests and
In the paper with Michael Walpole that I published in 2020, we tell many stories of how this happened over the decades. So many examples of backlash, and the government had to backtrack. But the Colombian case just happened a couple of years ago, so it's not on that paper because the paper is from 2020. But I had a Colombian student in my classes at Oxford last year, and he told the whole story. I mean, I already knew from the news what had happened, but he told me from a local perspective what had happened, and it was basically the government was not able to explain to people. So that paper basically explains the political dynamics. So in my paper with Arthur Swistak, what we do that was published last year, what we do is to offer a solution to the political economy problem. So not a solution only to the equity problem. We already kind of knew how to do it from New Zealand, but a solution to the political economy problem. And the solution to the political economy problem, as we propose on that paper, is a progressive VAT. And the idea is pick up the welfare transfers model from the New Zealanders, but instead of making a welfare payment at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, we use real-time technology to basically apply a de facto exemption from VAT for people below a certain level of income. Now, what is that level of income? It's each country's choice. So, it could be people
but
below...
still you would need to eliminate the reduced rates still, right?
Yes, of course.
In VAT.
You eliminate the reduced rates, you eliminate the exemptions.
But the political way of convincing people is that it happens at the same time that we are...
Yes, exactly. So people do not have even a cash flow impact, right? You go to the shop, you basically the cashier asks you this. This is just an example. The cashier asks you your tax number, introduces your tax number. The system in real-time technology sends the information to the data warehouse. The data warehouse identifies you as a low-income taxpayer, immediately makes a transfer back.
Yeah. And you're so transfer back on your price is lower.
No, transfer back, and the reason why is because the retailer shouldn't know that your price is lower for two reasons. Because he might be tempted to give you a higher price if he knows that the price is lower for you. So you don't want to give that power to retailers.
Very good point.
One, but second reason is that you don't want welfare stigma. You don't want people to know that you're
privacy matters, right?
Exactly. You don't want the retailer to know that you're a low-income taxpayer.
But so this is very interesting. But still, there is this problem of the protests on the streets, right?
Not really, because what you can say to people is, those on low incomes don't pay VAT.
Okay, it's easier because you will say to them that we maybe technically we are eliminating the reduced rates, but you will get the refund immediately,
right? So
right?
basically you never pay. So in essence, because it's done in real time, the money is already in your account. Nothing changes.
Only technicalities changes, right?
Only technology. So obviously for us who are legal experts, we know that the law says that it's a single rate VAT, right? From the legum perspective, it is, or de jure perspective, it is a flat rate VAT, a single rate VAT, right? But de facto, there is exemptions for low-income taxpayers. So de facto, it is a progressive VAT. You're only taxing the richest. Now, who is rich in your country, you can decide.
Of course, that is a secondary
problem, right? But people on low incomes do not have to pay. So if you are, for example, on a very unequal society, where loads of people are poor, you can say 80% of the population doesn't need to pay VAT. Only the top 20% pays VAT. So in which case you're literally just taxing the richest. Like really, right? So it really is about taxing the rich with a VAT. And this is obviously very progressive. So what we see on that paper, and we show on that paper, is introducing this method would basically make the tax both more efficient and more equitable. So it immediately decreases inequality, this system, because obviously you're taxing the richest but not the poorest. So you're immediately decreasing inequality, but you're also increasing the efficiency of the tax. So in essence, is like almost like an unheard of situation in tax, which is there is gains on both equity and efficiency. Usually you have a trade-off. A more efficient tax is less equitable, a more equitable is less efficient. Here you have equity gains and efficiency gains, both of them with this progressive VAT. So if people want to see the paper, it's published by the IMF last year. So it's a 2024 paper by me and Arthur Swister.
We will also give a link to that. I know we are talking for some time now, but could you I will not go through all those questions, I promise, but could you very briefly maybe indicate other relations or places where VAT and fairness or equality comes into play? I mean, of course, I know that what is fairness is a problem, what is equality is a problem, and so on. But generally, where because of course we were talking about regressivity, big reduced rates, and so on. But any other points where this interacts somehow, VAT and those topics?
Yes, so I'll just briefly mention this. So in the follow-up paper that Arthur and I have, we touch upon this. So historically, reduced rates and exemptions have been used primarily to decrease the regressivity of the tax. So it interacted with income inequality. What we're seeing in more recent years is that we are using the VAT system to tackle other types of inequality. So gender inequality, for example, people think about the tampon tax.
Okay.
Or other types of inequality, for example, disability. We see a lot of countries using exemptions for products that are used only by disabled people. There is a couple of countries that even are using it to tackle age inequality. So they don't tax products that are used by the elderly. So what we're seeing in terms of tendencies is not only that the VAT system is being progressively more used to tackle income inequality, but we're using it to do other things, other types of inequalities, gender, disability, age, and even other objectives. For example, environmental inequality. So we're using it to achieve more sustainable results. So taxing less green products, for example. So we're seeing more and more the VAT system being used to achieve regulatory aims and to achieve other types of higher equality that are not just income.
And long story short, it's not a good way of doing things.
Long story short, is the same problem as income.
Yeah, okay, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
On tampons, even assuming that prices decrease, because in many countries where the tampon tax has been abolished, prices have not decreased. It's the case here in the UK, for example, where there is no visible effect on prices.
And it was, I understand that I've heard also on your podcast, I guess, that there was a lobby of those producers of tampons, right, to decrease the rate, but finally the price did not go down.
Yes. So here in the UK, but in other countries it has gone down. But in the UK, so it depends from the market conditions, of course. It depends on the competitiveness of the market and supply and demand factors. But in the UK, it hasn't. But even if you assume that the price does decrease, of course, someone on higher income will buy more expensive products.
That's the same problem.
It's the same problem. It's the same problem. And of course, it creates loads of other issues. So now in the UK, you're basically discussing whether the the zero rate on tampons should be extended to other type of sanitary products. So you're seeing the same type of the arguments. So this is now about what is it called? Sanitary underwear, I think. So whether it should be extended to that. So it becomes an issue of litigation always. The costs are always higher. The solution to period poverty, which is actually an issue in many, many countries, including in many rich countries, is doing what happens in several countries, including here in the UK and Scotland, which is to provide free tampons in areas that are deprived, or, for example, in schools. So the Scottish government there is a free tampon dispensary in every public school in Scotland, and that's a more effective way of achieving that same aim. We go back to the library example or the other issues with income inequality.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Last question, last topic, very, very briefly. This is something original, I guess. I don't know, but I wanted to ask you about one thing about VAT front and the concept of knew or should have known doctrine.
What a classic story for a lawyer.
Yeah. So what bothers me is that, I've come across many cases in which there was those buffers, the honest entrepreneur in a chain, in a fraudulent chain, in a carousel fraud chain, let's say, and the entrepreneur actually really didn't know, or maybe should have known, but he was in a position, for example, 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 15 years ago, where he was tricked into this carousel fraud, and maybe according to the standards as we see today, maybe he should have known, but he had no information about the carousel frauds, or there was no education about this. So in other words, there were people who couldn't know that they were doing something wrong, that they should be aware, or they should be like, suspicious about anything, because there was no enough education about this doctrine and so on. Because in Poland, for example, it was like 10 years ago where everybody started talking about this, where everybody knew after the campaign of the Ministry of Finance that we should be be cautious and suspicious on the market and so on. What I'm saying is that many of those entrepreneurs were put in a situation where their right to deduct were denied, but it was not on a legislative act, or no legislative act said that under these conditions the input VAT will be denied, or even in directive there is no such a thing, but this is a case law of the court. So in other words, this doctrine is not legislated. There were many people in which they didn't know that they are doing something wrong. Maybe they should have known according to today's standards, but they didn't know that they are doing something wrong buying those iPhones from this strange guy, and still they were punished because of the millions of zlotys that they needed to get back to the tax authorities for the deeds or crimes they committed a couple of years back. So the question is, do you think that it turned out as it should turn out?
This issue of joint several liability, or third-party liability, as the court calls it, is one of my pet problems for the last 10 years. I understand how this has arisen. I understand the reasoning. I feel that this is an extremely powerful weapon that can only be exercised with extreme caution. Now, I know that we don't have time to go into detail into the ins and outs of this, but I want to alert to what is happening, because sometimes we're so engrossed in the story that we forget to see the big picture of this. Now, when you think about this liability, you think, oh, this is just an enforcement action. So, if you were involved in fraud, you should pay for it, right? And people are thinking, you should be punished for whatever you have done. As you mentioned, this doctrine, this principle as developed by the court, means that tax administrations all over Europe, and I should say that this is not a European phenomenon. There are many other countries doing the same thing. So Canada has the same type of action. Brazil has the same type of action. So this is not a European phenomenon. This is a general tendency in tax administrations to apply this type, some form of this principle of our doctrine. Means that in essence is not the person who is being punished is not someone that committed the fraud, but someone that was somehow involved and probably didn't know about it. Now, when you think about this from a criminal law perspective, so from tax, it seems like a natural thing. Like when you look at the case law of the court, you see that how it emerged step by step, a little bit by little bit, you just pushed a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. But when you kind of abstract and you push away, think about the enormity of what we have done from a criminal law perspective. Now, forget the word tax. This is just any illegal activity. Someone is being punished for a crime they did not commit, that was committed by someone else. Sometimes at the time that they contacted that person, the crime had not even been committed. So the crime may be committed in the future. And it doesn't even need to be in the same country. It can have been committed in another country. So it's being applied extra-jurisdictionally.
Exactly.
So think about this from a criminal law perspective. Someone is punished for a crime they did not commit, that is committed by someone else, so maybe sometime in the future, in another country.
What I would into that, and maybe, sorry to interrupt you, but this is very, very important for me, because what I maybe didn't express enough clearly, he did something that was not written in any legislation, that it is punishable or that is something wrong, that it is, there was no legislative act stipulated by any parliament or whatever in the world that this is something perceived by a legal system as wrong.
So that is the case in Europe and how it developed. I can tell you that there are now some countries that do have third-party liability legal rules.
Sure.
But this is the case. This was the case in Europe and how it developed. But even if it is statutorily stated,
if
you eliminate the word tax from what I just said,
I know.
No one would accept this. Literally, no one would accept. They would say that it was unconstitutional. But you insert the word tax, and suddenly it is acceptable. So if you say just crime or illegal activity, it's unacceptable, unconstitutional. If you say tax crime or tax illegal tax activity, then somehow this becomes acceptable. And this bothers me a lot.
So you have the same thing too.
I do think that there is, so this is again an issue of balance. I understand why the rule has developed. I think that this has to be statutorily stated, and B, it needs to have legal safeguards. So the burden of proof has to be with the tax administrations to prove that you should have known.
Theoretically it is, but in practice,
no.
Theoretically,
theoretically
it is according to the case law, but of course,
so what I'm saying is that there should be a statutory provision where there is a rebuttable presumption. So you cannot state that is the burden of the taxpayer to prove. So should be the tax administration. And even when there is a presumption, you should have applied the principle of proportionality and say that presumption is still rebuttable. So the taxpayer should still be able to prove that there was no way he could have known at that moment in time, in that period, that this was an illegal activity. So I understand the need for a rule of this type. I find this to be a very, very powerful weapon that is only acceptable because it's in tax. And therefore, we need very, very significant extra higher standards, legal standards of protection. Otherwise, the possibility that this will be a very serious violation of the rule of law is there.
Okay. Now, I need to say that I wrote a piece on this. I mean, the blog post on International Tax Blog. So we will also link this one. I mean, it's called "What is VAT Fraud?" and there are arguments why. How I see this, basically, that there was no regulation, but the people are punished with it, which is most probably something wrong when it comes to compliance with the rule of law and other principles, most probably. So we will also give this a link. Rita, thank you very much. It was such a great time and such a pleasure. It's almost 2 hours. Wow! we will need to think what to do with this. But thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I had a great time.
Welcome to the Vadvocate Podcast, where we explore all things value-added tax to give you the insights you need as a VAT professional.